Welcome to Fear Spiral, the place where real stories twist into nightmares. Every sound you hear tonight, every door that creaks, every whisper that lingers in the dark, came from someone who swore it really happened. These aren't ghost stories made up for fun. They're true encounters, from people who explored haunted houses, abandoned attics, and forgotten basements, and came back changed. Tonight, we're diving into 14 true haunted house encounters you'll never forget. From the door that wouldn't stay closed, to the basement that breathed, to the house that followed someone home. So turn off your lights, put on your headphones, and remember, sometimes it's not the house that's haunted, it's the one who enters. If you enjoy true horror stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Fear Spiral, hit the bell icon, and comment below which story haunted you the most. Welcome to the Fear Spiral. The house on Miller Road. It was Halloween night of 2018, and I was 20 years old, back in my small hometown in rural Pennsylvania for the weekend. I'd driven up from college to see my friends and maybe relive some of the old Halloween memories we used to have. Back in high school, we always used to drive out past the edge of town, where Miller Road cut through the woods, to look at an old farmhouse everyone called the Reeves place. The story went that in the early 1970s, the Reeves family just vanished. No for sale signs, no police tape, just plates still on the table, toys scattered in the yard. Over the years, the house rotted into a leaning skeleton, broken porch steps, missing shingles, the roof caving like an open wound. Every Halloween, someone dared the others to go inside. No one ever did. Until that year. There were 4 of us that night. Me, my friend Lucas, his girlfriend Erin, and my cousin Tyler. It was around 11:45 p.m. when we turned onto Miller Road, headlights sweeping through bare trees. The sky was overcast, the moon just a pale bruise behind clouds. We were laughing too loud, all pretending we weren't nervous. Lucas kept saying, "We'll just peek inside, take a few photos, and leave." 5 minutes tops. The house appeared suddenly beyond a curve, a hulking black shape against the dark woods. The front door hung off its hinges and one of the upstairs windows glowed faintly, though I swear the house didn't have power anymore. We parked at the edge of the dirt driveway, engine idling. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Inside, the air was colder than outside, thick with dust and a smell like damp wood and something sweetly rotten, like old fruit. I clicked my flashlight on, the beam slicing through drifting dust motes. The wallpaper had peeled away in long strips, revealing swollen plaster underneath. A shattered picture frame lay on the floor. Inside it, a photo of a family, man, woman, 2 kids. Their eyes were scratched out. "Creepy," Erin whispered. Her voice trembled, though she tried to make it sound like a joke. We split up instinctively. Lucas and Erin wandered toward the kitchen, while Tyler and I climbed the staircase. Each step groaned beneath our weight, the wood soft from years of moisture. I remember feeling my heartbeat in my throat. Not just from fear, but from the sense that we weren't supposed to be there, that the house itself disapproved of our presence. Upstairs, the hallway stretched longer than it should have. Doors on either side stood half open, black voids beyond. My flashlight beam trembled slightly as I swept it across faded floral wallpaper and a single framed cross at the end of the hall. The moment my light hit it, a faint whisper brushed my ear, too close, like someone leaning in behind me. I spun around. Nothing, just Tyler at the top of the stairs looking at me. "You heard that, right?" I asked. He frowned. "Heard what?" Before I could answer, a thump echoed from one of the rooms down the hall. Not the sound of something falling, more like a footstep. I felt the air shift, cooler now, carrying that strange sweet rot smell again. Tyler muttered, "Probably raccoons," but he didn't sound convinced. We approached the nearest door, the one slightly ajar, and I nudged it open with my boot. The flashlight revealed what must have been a child's bedroom. The wallpaper was cartoon animals, faded and flaking. A small wooden bed sat in the corner, the mattress sagging in the middle. Beside it was a toy chest, its lid propped open. Inside, half buried in dust, was a porcelain doll with cracked cheeks and missing eyes. That's when we heard Lucas shout from downstairs, "Guys, get down here!" We rushed back to the stairway. Lucas stood in the living room, white-faced, his flashlight pointing toward the kitchen doorway. "Someone's in there," he whispered. I saw a shadow move, Aaron clutched his arm. It could be an animal, she said. Lucas shook his head. Too tall. We stood there, frozen, listening. The house had gone utterly silent. Even the usual creaks and groans of settling wood were gone. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy, crossing the kitchen floor. They stopped just behind the doorway. My mouth went dry. Who's there? I called, my voice cracking slightly. No answer. Lucas raised his flashlight, and in that instant we all saw it. A tall shape standing just at the edge of the doorway. Its outline human but wrong somehow, too thin, shoulders slumped forward like something hanging from invisible strings. The light flickered as if reacting to its presence, then steadied. The figure was gone. Aaron whimpered, "Let's just go, please." We backed toward the front door, our flashlights darting wildly around the room. That's when the piano in the corner began to play. A few slow off-key notes like someone pressing the keys with trembling fingers. None of us moved. I could see dust shaking off the strings inside as the keys depressed on their own. "Move," Tyler yelled, and we bolted out of the house. Outside, the air felt colder than before. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. Lucas fumbled with the keys, cursing, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice. Finally, the engine roared to life, and we sped down Miller Road, gravel spitting behind us. We didn't talk for several minutes. Then Aaron said quietly, "Did you see it in the window?" "What?" I asked. When we drove away and upstairs, someone was standing there, watching. No one wanted to look back. A week later, I went back alone. Stupid, I know. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd missed something, that the house had been waiting. It was early morning, around 7:30 a.m., the fog still clinging to the trees. In daylight, the house looked smaller, harmless even. The police tape I expected to find wasn't there, just the same leaning porch and that dark open door. Inside, everything was as we'd left it, except for one thing. The piano. Its lid was closed now, but a single key was pressed down, wedged somehow. And on top of the piano sat the doll from the child's room, its cracked face turned toward the window. I didn't stay long. As I turned to leave, a whisper floated down the hall behind me. It wasn't words, not exactly, more like a sigh, drawn out and mournful. I didn't look back this time. That night back home, I couldn't sleep. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the faint sound of a piano key being pressed, once, twice, coming from downstairs. We didn't own a piano. I moved out of that town a few months later. Lucas and Aaron broke up. Tyler won't talk about that night at all. But sometimes, especially around Halloween, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and swear I hear music. Just a few slow notes, and always afterward the silence feels alive. The window in the basement, it was the Halloween of 2019, and I was 24, living alone for the first time in a small town in northern Ohio. I'd just rented a century-old house that sat a little too far from its neighbors, surrounded by brittle cornfields and a patch of woods out back. The rent was cheap, almost suspiciously so, and the owner said the basement flooded sometimes but was otherwise sturdy for its age. I was broke and desperate, so I signed the lease. By late October, the weather had turned sharp and wet. The house was always cold, no matter how high I turned the thermostat, and at night the wind scraped the shutters like fingernails. The first couple of weeks were uneventful. I was finishing freelance work, making coffee at 2 a.m., falling asleep to podcasts, normal life. Then, about a week before Halloween, I started hearing things from the basement. The first time it happened, it was around 1:15 a.m. I was sitting at my desk when I heard a slow, hollow knock from beneath the floor. 3 knocks spaced apart. I froze, waiting, but it didn't repeat. I told myself it was the old pipes or maybe the wood contracting in the cold. Old houses made noises, but then it happened again the next night. Same rhythm, same time. 3 dull knocks from directly under the study. The basement door was off the kitchen. I finally went down there on the 3rd night, flashlight in one hand and a screwdriver in the other, like that would help. The steps creaked, the air smelled of earth and rust. When my light reached the bottom, I saw stone walls slick with condensation and shelves lined with jars of nails and screws, a few broken tools. There was no sound, no movement, just the hum of the furnace and my own breathing. Then I saw it, the small square window set into the far wall. It was half buried below ground level, covered in grime. A little trickle of water leaked down the glass from the outside. But it wasn't the window itself that bothered me. It was the faint outline of something on the other side. For a moment it looked like a face pressed against the glass. I blinked and the shape was gone. Probably my reflection, I told myself. Probably. I went back upstairs, locked the basement door, and tried to forget about it. 2 nights later, on October 30th, I was lying in bed half asleep, when a soft tapping started again, only this time it wasn't from the floor. It was from the wall behind my head. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, heart racing. The wall on that side faced the basement stairwell. I turned on the lamp and just listened. The sound stopped. The silence felt thick, like the house itself was waiting for me to react. The next morning I decided to call the landlord. He was an older man who owned half the town's rentals. When I mentioned the knocks in the window, there was a pause on the line. Then he said, "Best keep that basement closed up. Old houses shift. You hear all sorts of things." His tone had that edge of dismissal people use when they don't want to explain something. That night was Halloween. I didn't have plans, just microwaved dinner and a movie. The trick-or-treaters had stopped coming by around 9, and the neighborhood went quiet except for the wind. Around 11:40 p.m., the power flickered, just once, but enough to make every shadow in the room lurch. Then came the knocks again. 3 of them, louder this time. I stood up slowly, my skin crawling. The sound had come from the basement door. I grabbed my flashlight again. My breath came out white. The moment I touched the doorknob, the knocking stopped. I waited. Nothing. I almost turned away, but then I heard it, breathing, soft, uneven, coming from the other side of the door as if someone were standing just inches away. "Who's down there?" I said, trying to sound firm. The breathing paused. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, something answered, "Let me in." I stumbled backward so hard I hit the counter. The voice didn't sound angry or ghostly, it sounded human, tired, desperate. I wanted to believe it was a prank, some teenager from town. But I lived miles from anyone. There was no way someone could have been in the basement without breaking a lock. After a long minute of silence, I forced myself to open the door. The light switch at the top of the stairs didn't work. The bulb below had burned out. I aimed the flashlight down. The beam caught the concrete floor and footprints. Wet footprints leading from the bottom step toward that small window. I descended slowly, one creak at a time. The footprints were bare, small like a child's, and they stopped right beneath the window. My light glinted off something wet on the glass. I leaned closer. It wasn't moisture. It was handprints smeared across the inside, too high for a child to have reached. 5 fingers each, trailing downward like someone had dragged their hands down the pane. Then, from outside, something moved. I nearly dropped the flashlight. Through the murky glass, I saw a figure standing in the overgrown grass above ground level. It was hard to make out details through the grime, but I saw the pale suggestion of a face. The head tilted slightly, then vanished as if it had stepped back into the darkness. I bolted upstairs, slammed the door, and shoved a chair under the handle. I didn't sleep that night. Every so often I'd hear faint scraping sounds below, like fingernails on stone. Around 3 a.m., the noises stopped altogether, replaced by the distant sound of dripping water. By morning, everything seemed normal again. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, warming the tiles. When I finally worked up the nerve to check the basement, the footprints were gone. The window, however, was open just a crack. There were leaves scattered on the floor beneath it, wet and brown. Something had come in or out. I nailed the window shut that afternoon. A week passed without any incidents. I started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, stress or lack of sleep. Then one evening while doing laundry, I heard a soft rustling from the corner of the basement. My flashlight beam caught movement, a sheet of paper fluttering on the ground. I picked it up. It was a page torn from an old children's book, yellowed and damp. The illustration showed a girl sitting by a window smiling. Someone had scribbled across the bottom in shaky handwriting, "She waits below." That was the last night I spent in that house. I packed my things before dawn and drove to my sister's place 2 towns over. The landlord didn't seem surprised when I told him I was leaving. "People don't stay there long," he said quietly. When I pressed him, he finally told me why the rent had been so low. 20 years earlier, a woman and her young daughter had lived there. One winter night, the mother accidentally locked the girl in the basement during a flood. By the time she got the door open, the child had drowned against the window trying to escape. They say the mother couldn't stand the guilt. She hanged herself in the kitchen a week later. I don't know if ghosts are real, but sometimes when I think about that whisper, "Let me in," I wonder if it was a plea for help or something older, mimicking a voice it remembered. Either way, that window's still down there, and when I dream, I see a pale face pressed against it watching me through the glass. Voices in the attic. It happened 2 Halloweens ago in 2021, when I was renting a 2-story house in rural Vermont. I'd moved there after a bad breakup, needed space, quiet, isolation. The place was perfect for that. An old colonial farmhouse surrounded by maple trees 20 minutes from the nearest neighbor. The landlord had warned me about drafts, mice, and strange settling noises, but I didn't care. It felt like a refuge. Until it didn't. The first few weeks were peaceful. I worked remotely during the day, read at night, and sometimes went days without speaking to anyone. By late October, the days had turned short and gray, and the house creaked constantly as it cooled at night. I'd grown used to the occasional bump or scuttle of rodents in the walls. But on October 28th, around 12:20 a.m., I heard something that didn't sound like any animal. It came from the attic, slow, dragging footsteps directly above my bedroom. I froze, listening. The steps moved across the ceiling, paused, and then came again. The attic wasn't finished. Just insulation and beams, no reason anyone would be up there. I told myself it had to be squirrels or maybe raccoons. Still, I couldn't shake the image of someone pacing just above me. The next morning, I pulled down the attic ladder. A puff of cold, musty air spilled out. I climbed up, flashlight in hand, and scanned the dusty space. Old furniture, a trunk, some yellowed newspapers, nothing unusual. But when I crouched near the center, I noticed something carved into one of the wooden beams. "I can hear you too." I laughed nervously, telling myself it was a prank from a previous tenant. But the words looked fresh, like the wood had been cut recently. I left the attic alone after that. 2 nights later, Halloween Eve, I stayed up late working on my laptop. Around 2:15 a.m., I heard faint murmuring from upstairs. It sounded like several people talking, but the voices were muffled as if coming through the ceiling. At first, I thought it was the TV from a neighbor, until I remembered I didn't have any neighbors close enough for that. I muted my laptop. The voices grew clearer. Not distinct words, just low, overlapping whispers like a crowd murmuring prayers. The sound rose and fell rhythmically, almost hypnotic. My chest tightened. "Hello?" I called up toward the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just air moving through vents. The whispers stopped instantly. Silence stretched for several seconds before something tapped 3 times on the ceiling. Tap, tap, tap. I barely slept that night. Halloween Day came cold and gray. The wind whipped through the trees and rattled the shutters. I kept telling myself the house was old. That sound traveled strangely through old beams. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even the air inside seemed heavier, like breathing through damp fabric. Around 11 p.m., I sat by the window watching the wind move the trees when I heard it again. Muffled footsteps, slow and steady above me. I decided to end this once and for all. I grabbed my flashlight and phone, pulled down the attic ladder, and started climbing. The wood felt colder than before, almost damp under my hands. The air up there was freezing, thick with the smell of dust and something faintly metallic. My flashlight beam caught on the old trunk in the corner. It was open now, though I could have sworn it had been closed last time. Inside were old dolls, brittle and gray with age, their eyes missing. One of them had a small scrap of paper tied around its neck. I leaned closer. In neat handwriting it said, "Do you hear them too?" I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Then somewhere deeper in the attic, a floorboard creaked. I swung my light in that direction but saw only darkness. The whispers started again, this time closer, coming from everywhere at once. Male and female voices overlapping, hushed but urgent. I turned to climb down, but the ladder wasn't there. The opening to the hallway below was gone, just solid wood where it should have been. My stomach dropped. I blinked hard, thinking maybe the light had played tricks on me, but when I reached out, my fingers brushed cold boards. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like wind through tall grass. "Why did you come up?" A voice hissed suddenly right behind my ear. I spun around. Nothing there. My flashlight flickered, then died. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen stayed black. Total darkness pressed against me. Then the footsteps started again, circling me this time. I could feel the board shift under invisible weight. hear shallow breathing just inches away. "Stop," I whispered, more to myself than whatever was there. A hand, ice cold and thin, brushed my shoulder. I screamed and stumbled forward. My foot hit something metallic, the old trunk, and I fell hard against it. The impact made the lid slam shut. When it did, the attic went utterly silent. No whispers, no movement. For a long moment, I just sat there in the dark, shaking. Then, without warning, the opening reappeared. The ladder hung down like it had never been gone. I didn't question it. I climbed down so fast I nearly fell, slammed the attic door shut, and pushed a chair beneath it. I stayed awake the rest of the night, lights on, TV blaring just for the comfort of sound. Every now and then I'd hear faint thumps from above, like someone shifting position. The next morning I called my landlord. He sounded irritated when I mentioned the noises. When I told him about the carvings and voices, he went quiet. Finally, he said, "You weren't supposed to go up there." "What do you mean?" I asked. He sighed. "The last tenant had issues. Claimed she heard people in the attic too. She said they wanted her to join them. I found her up there one morning. She'd sealed herself inside that old trunk." I hung up before he could say more. I wanted to believe it was a sick story meant to scare me into moving out. But that night, when I checked the attic hatch, the lock was already latched from the inside. I haven't gone up there since. I sleep downstairs now, though. Sleep isn't really the right word. Some nights around 3 a.m. I still hear the whispers, faint, careful, almost polite, like they're trying not to wake me. And sometimes I swear I hear my own voice among them. The Mirror House in 2020, during that strange, isolated Halloween when most people were still avoiding gatherings, I did something stupid. My two friends, Riley and Cass, and I decided to explore an abandoned mansion outside our town in upstate New York. Everyone in the area called it the Mirror House because almost every wall inside was covered in mirrors. Some said the man who built it was obsessed with reflections. Others said he'd gone mad after his wife disappeared and had them installed so he'd never feel alone again. The property sat at the end of a long dirt drive, hidden by trees that had grown wild for decades. The last owner had died in the 1980s, and no one had touched the place since. We picked Halloween night because it fit the vibe, as Riley put it. The three of us had flashlights, a cheap camera, and the kind of naive confidence you only have in your 20s. We arrived just before 11 p.m. The air was damp and cold, our breath visible in the beams of our flashlights. The mansion's front doors hung slightly open, and the inside smelled like mildew and dust. The floorboards sagged under our weight, Cass whispered. "I can't believe people actually lived here." The entryway was enormous, spiraling staircase, cracked chandelier, and mirrors lining every wall. They were all different, some tall and rectangular, some round, some with ornate frames. Many were fogged over, but some still reflected perfectly, which was somehow worse. We started filming as we explored, laughing nervously, calling out echoes of our own footsteps. I remember running my hand along a dusty banister and catching a glimpse of movement in one of the mirrors, something that looked like a person stepping just out of view. I turned quickly. "No one was there. Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" Riley said. I didn't answer. It was probably just our reflection catching a weird angle. Probably. We moved through the first floor, room by room. Every single one had mirrors. In some they were cracked. In others they were positioned at strange angles, reflecting corners instead of people. Cass joked that the owner must have been narcissistic, but after a while even she went quiet. At 12:10 a.m. we reached a long hallway that stretched the entire width of the house. Both sides were lined with mirrors, floor to ceiling. When we stood in the middle, it felt like being trapped between infinite copies of ourselves. I lifted my flashlight and our reflections seemed to ripple slightly, as if the glass were made of water. "You guys see that?" I whispered. Riley nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's not just me, right?" Cass muttered. "Okay, this is officially creeping me out." She turned to leave, and that's when we all heard it. A soft sound, like someone breathing. It wasn't ours. It came from deeper down the hallway behind the reflections. Riley said, "Hello?" For a second, silence. Then a faint whisper, almost playful. "You shouldn't be here." The words echoed through the mirrors, overlapping, multiplying until it sounded like a dozen voices repeating the same thing. The air grew icy. Our flashlights flickered, the beams bending unnaturally, reflecting light in directions that didn't make sense. "Let's go," Cass said firmly, grabbing my arm. We ran back toward the foyer, but halfway down the hall, I noticed something wrong with our reflections. They weren't moving exactly when we did. A half-second delay, like they were watching, waiting. Riley turned his flashlight on one mirror and froze. "Guys, look, in the reflection there were 4 of us." Another figure stood slightly behind, just out of the light. Tall, pale, no face, just smooth skin where eyes and mouth should have been. When we spun around, there was nothing. But in the mirror, it took a step closer. That broke us. We bolted through the foyer and down the front steps, gasping cold air. Cass tripped, scraping her knee, but we didn't stop. We dove into Riley's car and sped off down the dirt road, headlights bouncing. No one spoke for several minutes. Finally, Riley said, "Tell me you saw that too." Cass nodded silently, tears streaking her face. I just stared out the window, trying to slow my breathing. When we got back to my apartment, we rewatched the footage we'd recorded. At first, it was just us laughing, exploring. Then, near the hallway scene, the camera glitched, static cutting in for half a second. When the image returned, we saw something that made my skin crawl. Behind us, in the mirror's reflection, that faceless figure was standing between us, one pale hand resting on my shoulder. I paused the video, rewound, played again. It was there every time. But when I looked closer, I realized something even worse. The hand wasn't resting on me. It was coming through me. Over the next few days, strange things started happening at my apartment. Every mirror I owned, bathroom, closet, even my phone screen, seemed to flicker for a second before showing my reflection. Sometimes I'd see movement behind me even though I lived alone. On November 2nd, around 2:30 a.m., I woke to the sound of glass cracking. I ran to the bathroom. The mirror above the sink had split down the middle. In the fracture, my reflection didn't match. Its eyes were open wider, mouth slightly smiling. I stepped back, heart hammering. Then in the reflection, my double leaned forward and whispered, though I didn't hear sound, just saw the words form. "Come back." I covered the mirror with a towel and didn't go near it again. Riley and Cass both moved away a month later. Riley said his car windows kept fogging from the inside, handprints appearing even when he was alone. Cass claimed she woke up one night to find her mirror covered in condensation, a single word drawn in it. "Stay." We don't talk about that night anymore. The footage vanished from my laptop, literally gone one morning, no trace. Last Halloween, I drove past the property again. The mansion was gone, completely leveled. But as I slowed near where the house had stood, I noticed something shining in the weeds, a shard of mirror catching the moonlight. When I bent down to look at it, my reflection smiled before I did. The man in the basement door. I was 19 the year this happened, back in 2016. It was my first year living away from home, renting a room in an old 2-story house near my community college in Indiana. The place was cheap, mostly because the owner, Mrs. Hendricks, was in her 70s and couldn't keep up with maintenance. There were 4 of us renting rooms, all students, but because of differing class schedules, I was often the only one home during the evenings. The house itself had character. Creaky floors, floral wallpaper, faint smell of cedar and dust, the kind of place you feel might hold a memory in every corner. There was just one thing about it that always unsettled me: the basement door. It was tucked away at the end of the narrow hallway beside the kitchen, painted an old shade of white that had yellowed over time. The door had no handle, just a heavy iron latch that locked from the outside. Mrs. Hendricks told us it was always to remain closed, because the basement flooded often and she didn't want anyone tripping over tools or pipes down there. At first, I didn't question it. But after living there a few weeks, I started hearing noises from behind it. It began with light tapping, irregular, faint, like water dripping or wood settling. Then some nights around 2 or 3 a.m., I'd hear something that sounded like a whisper. Not words exactly, just low tones that reminded me of someone humming through their teeth. I mentioned it once to Mrs. Hendricks over breakfast. Her hand froze midair, spoon halfway to her mouth. She said quickly, "It's the furnace. You'll get used to it." Then she changed the subject. The next few nights were quiet, and I almost convinced myself it was the furnace, until Halloween night. All my roommates had gone home for the weekend, so I was completely alone. The air was colder than usual, the kind of crisp that makes everything feel sharper. I stayed up late finishing an essay, my only light a desk lamp and the faint orange glow from the street outside. Around 1:45 a.m., the house went completely silent. I didn't notice it at first, but when I did, it hit me how absolute it was. The fridge had stopped humming, no pipes creaked, and nothing. Then came the sound. 3 slow knocks from behind the basement door. I froze, staring toward the kitchen. The knocks came again, this time softer, like fingertips instead of knuckles. "Hello?" I called out, instantly regretting it. No reply. I stood, heart thudding, and took a few steps toward the hallway. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with the smell of damp earth. I reached the door and crouched, pressing my ear against the wood. For a few seconds there was only silence, then a breath, not mine, deep, uneven, right on the other side. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself. The knocking started again, faster this time, desperate. The sound made my chest tighten with panic. My instinct screamed to leave, but some irrational part of me needed to see. I grabbed a flashlight from the counter and aimed it at the crack beneath the door. Something moved in the gap, a shadow like the outline of feet shifting back and forth. That's when I noticed the latch. It wasn't locked anymore. I could see it trembling, like someone was pressing up against the other side of the door, testing it. I whispered, "Mrs. Hendricks." The latch lifted and halfway, then slowly back down, as though someone wanted me to know they could open it if they wanted to. I backed away until I hit the opposite wall, shaking so badly I could hardly hold the flashlight straight. Then, in a low, rasping voice, came 3 words that froze my blood. "He let me in." The voice sounded male, but broken, like it had been unused for years. I ran upstairs, locked myself in my room, and sat on the floor listening. For almost an hour there were faint movements downstairs, a dragging sound, then silence. At 4:03 a.m. I heard the front door creak open, then close. When I finally came down after sunrise, the house looked exactly the same, except for the basement door. The latch was back in place, but it was bent, like someone had pulled it from the inside. I didn't tell Mrs. Hendricks right away. I didn't even want to think about it. That night she came by to check on the furnace. I asked if she'd been home during the night. She frowned. "No, I was visiting my sister. I told her what I'd heard." For a moment she just stared at me, her face pale. Then she sighed and sat down heavily. "I shouldn't have rented that room," she said quietly. "There was a man who lived here before, years ago. A tenant in the basement. He kept to himself, and nice enough until he wasn't. One winter he disappeared. Police never found him. They said he might have fallen into the old well behind the property, but the night he went missing, I heard him knocking on that door, just like you did. I felt a chill crawl up my back. Did you open it?" She shook her head slowly. "No, but someone did, because the latch was broken when I came downstairs, same as now. I moved out the following week, found a cheap apartment closer to campus, but that last night in the house I couldn't sleep. Around 2:30 a.m. the pipes rattled and I thought I heard soft footsteps in the hall outside my door. Then from far below came a single knock. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just nerves. But when I turned over, I noticed the faintest glow under my door. A sliver of light flickering, like someone was walking past with a candle. Then came a whisper through the wall, close enough to feel warm against my ear. "He let me in. Now it's your turn." I left before sunrise, didn't even look back at the house. A week later, I drove by to grab some mail I'd forgotten. The basement door was gone, just a blank stretch of wall freshly painted over. Mrs. Hendricks had moved out too. No forwarding address. Sometimes, though, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear that faint metallic click, the sound of an old latch lifting. And for a split second, I can almost smell the earth again. The room with no eerie was 22 when this happened. It was the year my best friend Dylan and I decided to spend Halloween weekend exploring abandoned houses for a short documentary. We'd been making low-budget urban exploration videos for a small YouTube channel, and while most of them got only a few hundred views, our followers always asked for haunted locations. So that year we went big. We picked an old property in rural Pennsylvania known locally as the Morris Estate. The story went that the family who'd owned it in the 1950s had vanished overnight, leaving furniture, dishes, and even clothes still hanging in the closets. No one had lived there since. We arrived around 6:30 p.m., just as the last of the sun bled out over the trees. The road that led there was narrow and cracked, swallowed by brush on both sides. The air smelled of cold wood smoke and fallen leaves. We parked about 100 yards away and hiked through knee-high grass toward the looming shape of the house. It stood 2 stories tall, dark against the twilight. The windows were shattered. The porch sagged forward like a broken jaw. The whole place looked like it was leaning, tired of holding its own weight. Dylan laughed nervously. "Perfect haunted house, man," he said, adjusting his camera strap. "Yeah," I muttered. Perfect. I wasn't as excited as he was. Something about the silence felt wrong. Even in the woods, there should have been something, the crickets, the wind, maybe a bird. But there was nothing. Just a thick, pressing stillness. Inside, the air changed. It was heavier, colder, almost wet. The floorboards groaned under every step. Dust hung in the beam of our flashlights, swirling like slow fog. We moved from room to room, filming, whispering commentary. "You can see the furniture's still here," Dylan said to the camera. "They say the Morris family left everything behind one night in 1953. No explanation." I scanned the living room. An overturned chair, a broken lamp, wallpaper curling off the walls like dead skin. The fireplace still had blackened logs in it, long turned to ash. But the thing that really caught my eye was a closed door under the staircase. It looked newer than the rest of the house. While everything else was rotted and faded, this door was strangely intact. Clean white paint, a modern brass knob. I pointed it out to Dylan. "Dude, that doesn't fit," I said. "That door looks new." He frowned, zooming in with his camera. "Maybe someone fixed it up at some point." I turned the knob. It opened easily. A rush of cold, dry air hit my face. Stale, metallic, and foul, like something sealed away too long. The beam from my flashlight barely pierced the darkness inside. It wasn't a basement or closet. It was just a room, square, windowless, empty except for a single wooden chair in the center. We stepped inside. Immediately, I felt something shift, not physically, but in the air. The moment I crossed the threshold, it felt heavier, denser, as though the oxygen had thinned. My chest tightened. I took a deep breath, but it didn't help. "You feel that?" I asked. Dylan nodded, visibly uneasy. "Yeah, air's weird in here. Hard to breathe." We stood there, cameras rolling, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then behind me, the door slammed shut. I jumped and spun around. The knob wouldn't budge. Dylan yanked at it too, but it was stuck fast. "Stop filming and help me push it," I hissed. We threw our shoulders against the door, but it didn't move an inch. My chest burned with each breath. The air was so thin it felt like breathing through cloth. Then I realized the room had gone utterly silent. Not even the sound of our breathing echoed back. It was like the walls were swallowing the noise. Dylan said something. I saw his lips move, but no sound came out. Panic surged through me. I hit the door with both fists, screaming, but even that made no echo. The silence pressed harder, like a physical weight. Then I noticed the camera light flickering. Dylan turned toward me, pale, his eyes wide. He pointed toward the far corner of the room. Something was there. At first it looked like a shadow, but it wasn't cast by our flashlights. It moved on its own. It stretched slowly along the floor, rising up the wall, forming the faint outline of a person. No features, just an absence of light. It began to walk or glide toward the chair. The air grew colder with each inch it moved. The shadow bent as if sitting, its head turning toward us. I wanted to run, to break down the door, but my limbs wouldn't respond. My lungs burned. Dylan dropped his camera, clutching his throat. I heard a faint wheeze, like air being sucked out of the room. That's when the shadow opened its mouth. There was no sound, just movement, but I felt it. Like the air was being pulled from my chest. My vision blurred, edges going black. I stumbled forward, hitting the floor hard. Dylan collapsed beside me. I remember clawing at the door, my fingers numb, nails scraping wood. Then, the door flew open. We fell into the hallway, gasping, coughing, the heavy air rushing out behind us with a hiss like escaping steam. The silence shattered. I could hear again. The creak of the floorboards, the wind outside. Dylan slammed the door shut. Neither of us said a word for several minutes. When I finally looked at him, his face was ghost white. You saw it too, right? I whispered. He nodded shakily. We're leaving. Right now. We packed up in silence and drove away without looking back. It wasn't until the next morning that we checked the footage. The audio inside the room was completely gone, nothing but static. But near the end, right before the door opened, there was one faint, distorted sound. A voice whispering, barely audible beneath the static. Breathe for me. Dylan quit filming after that. Deleted our entire channel within a week. I kept the original SD card, though I've never watched it again. Sometimes I still think about that room, about the way the air felt like it was alive pressing against my skin. A few months later, I went back to see if the house was still standing. The property was fenced off, marked for demolition. I asked a construction worker if they'd been inside yet. He nodded and said something strange. Yeah, weirdest thing. Every door in the place opens fine except one. Which one? I asked. He shrugged. A little white door under the stairs. Won't open no matter how we pull. Feels like the air's glued shut behind it. That night I dreamt I was back in that room, the one with no air. Only this time there were 2 chairs, and something was whispering in the dark between them. The candle in the hallway. I was 17 when this happened, back in 2013. My family had just moved to a small town in upstate New York after my dad got transferred for work. The house we moved into wasn't new. It was one of those narrow 2-story Victorians built in the early 1900s, with creaky steps and long, echoing hallways. It sat on a quiet street lined with dying oak trees, their branches scratching the windows whenever the wind picked up. It was late October when we moved in, about a week before Halloween. I remember the realtor mentioning that the house had history. She said it lightly, but I could tell by her tone she didn't mean good history. Still, my parents brushed it off. It was affordable, it was spacious, and we were tired of living in an apartment. For the first few nights, everything was fine. I'd stay up late in my new room upstairs, scrolling through my phone, listening to the occasional creak of the old pipes or the wind slipping through the cracks. But then I started noticing something odd. Every night around 2:30 a.m., I'd wake up suddenly, not from a noise but from stillness. It was as if the whole house held its breath. The usual sounds stopped, and then faintly from the hallway just outside my room, I'd smell wax, not candle wax like from scented candles, but that thick, sooty, burnt smell you get from melted old wax and smoke. The first time, I assumed my mom had left one burning somewhere, so I got up to check. But when I opened my door, the hallway was pitch dark, except for a small orange glow near the far end. It looked like candlelight. I froze, heart hammering. The flickering glow swayed slightly, casting shadows that crawled along the wallpaper. I whispered, "Mom?" but got no answer. When I blinked, the light was gone. The next morning, I asked my mom if she'd been awake around that time. She said no, that everyone had been asleep since midnight. My dad laughed and said, "Maybe it's your imagination. Old houses make noises. Sometimes lights reflect weirdly." I wanted to believe him, but that night it happened again. Same time, same smell of burning wax. This time I stayed in bed, staring at the gap under my door. After about a minute I saw it, a faint orange shimmer just barely visible on the floorboards. The light moved, passing slowly across the crack like someone walking past with a candle. My skin went cold. I could hear soft footsteps and deliberate, slow, almost dragging. They stopped right outside my door. I didn't breathe. For a few seconds there was silence. Then something lightly scraped against the wood. A sound like a fingernail tracing the outline of my doorframe. I wanted to yell for my parents, but my throat locked up. After what felt like forever, the footsteps started again, fading down the hallway toward the stairs. When I finally opened my door, there was nothing there. But the smell, that old wax and smoke, was stronger than ever. The next day I searched the house. There were no candles anywhere, not even in storage. My mom didn't like open flames inside. That ruled out my parents. A few nights later, it got worse. I'd stayed up late watching videos on my laptop. When I finally looked at the clock, it was 2:27 a.m. My stomach dropped. I didn't even have to wait long. By 2:30, I felt that stillness again. No ticking clock, no wind, just silence. Then, from outside my door, the candlelight appeared. Only this time it wasn't at the far end of the hall. It was right outside. I could see the faint flicker against my door, and this time it didn't move past. It stopped there. I sat up, trying to listen. I could hear something faint, breathing. Slow, shaky, uneven, I whispered, "Who's there?" The breathing stopped. Then a voice, and soft, almost childlike, and whispered back, "It's cold." My whole body seized up. I bolted out of bed and yanked open the door. The hallway was empty. But at the far end, right before the stairs, a single candle sat on the floor, burning low. The wax had melted into a thick puddle that stretched along the floorboards like it had been burning for hours. I stepped closer, shaking. The candle was old, half melted, with thick black soot along its sides. I could feel the heat from it even from a few feet away. Then, from behind me, I heard the floor creak. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but nothing was there. Still I felt it, that presence, a pressure in the air like someone was standing inches away. I whispered, "Mom?" Again hoping for an answer, but only the candle flickered in response. I blew it out. The moment I did, something exhaled right behind my ear. I turned so fast I nearly fell, but there was nothing. The air had gone icy cold, my breath visible. I ran into my parents' room, heart pounding so loud I could barely get words out. My mom woke up instantly, confused. My dad grabbed a bat and checked the hallway. The candle was gone. No wax, no smoke, nothing. They told me it must have been a dream. But I knew it wasn't. The next day I was determined to find out more. I went to the local library and looked up the property records. Turns out the house had been in the same family for 3 generations, the Whitakers. In 1971, there'd been a fire. A teenage girl named Evelyn Whitaker had died in her sleep. The fire had started in the upstairs hallway. Investigators suspected it came from an unattended candle. Her room. It was the same one that was now mine. That night I begged my parents to let me sleep in their room. They agreed, mostly to calm me down. I fell asleep around midnight, but at 2:30 I woke up again. The smell was there. Even from my parents' room I could smell that old burning wax. I sat up trembling, staring at the open doorway. At first it was dark. Then slowly a faint glow appeared down the hall, flickering orange like before. But this time it didn't stay still. It moved toward us. I grabbed my dad's arm, whispering, "Dad, wake up." He groaned and turned just as the candlelight reached the doorway. And then for a brief second I saw her. A girl, maybe 16 or 17, her face pale and half-burned, one eye clouded white. She stood holding a candle, melted wax dripping down her wrist, smoke curling from her hair. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. Just a faint crackle like fire. My dad sat bolt upright, eyes wide. But before he could move, the light blinked out. We searched the entire house again, nothing. 2 days later, my parents moved us to a hotel until we could find another place. They told the realtor the house was unsafe, citing electrical issues, but I know the truth. The night before we left, I went upstairs one last time to pack. The hallway was cold, empty, silent. I looked where the candle had once burned. The floor was clean. But when I opened my bedroom door, there was something sitting on my desk. A single candle. Old, half-melted with streaks of soot running down the side. And carved into the wax with small, shaky letters were 2 words. "It's cold." The house that waited. I was 24 when this happened. The year I almost quit urban exploration for good. It was Halloween night, 2018, and my friend group had this yearly tradition of exploring a supposedly haunted house somewhere near our town in Ohio. Usually, it was just harmless fun. Abandoned barns, empty schools, stuff like that. We'd take flashlights, film a bit, spook each other, and leave before midnight. That year, though, our friend Jordan found something different, a house known locally as the Holloway Place. It sat off an old dirt road that wasn't even on most maps anymore. Rumor was the house had been abandoned for decades, but every year people swore they saw lights in the windows around Halloween. We met up around 10 p.m. 4 of us, me, Jordan, my girlfriend Emma, and another friend, Matt. We parked on the roadside where the pavement gave way to gravel. The air was freezing, our breaths coming out like smoke. The woods on either side felt alive, the kind of dark that moves when you stare too long. The house came into view after about 10 minutes of walking. Tall, 2 stories, windows boarded, roof sagging. The porch light was long gone, but a single lantern hung crookedly from a hook, swaying in the breeze. "Looks like something out of a nightmare," Matt muttered, pulling his hoodie tighter. "Perfect," Jordan said, grinning. "Let's go." The front door was locked, so we circled around to the back. The kitchen window was half broken. We climbed in one by one. The moment I landed on the floor, my flashlight flickered. The air smelled of wet wood and something else. Old iron, maybe blood. "Smells like a damn cellar," Emma whispered. Inside, everything was still. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling, wallpaper peeled off like skin. There were dishes on the counter, rusted silverware in drawers as if whoever lived here had left in a hurry. The strangest thing was the temperature. It was cold outside, sure, but inside it was colder. The kind of cold that burns your lungs when you breathe. We spread out. Jordan took the living room. Matt headed upstairs. Emma and I stayed near the kitchen. I tried to record a short clip for my phone, but every time I hit record, the screen glitched, and the camera froze. That's when I heard it, a sound from deeper in the house. A slow, deliberate creak of footsteps. "Jordan?" I called out. No answer. I looked at Emma. She'd heard it too. We moved carefully toward the hallway. The floorboards groaned beneath our shoes. My light caught on something ahead, a door slightly ajar at the end of the corridor. It wasn't just open. It was moving, swaying like someone had just walked through. We reached it slowly. The brass knob was cold to the touch, slick with condensation. I pushed it open and shined my light inside. It was a sitting room, or had been. The furniture was covered with white sheets, dust motes floating through the beam of the flashlight. There was a faint ticking sound, steady and rhythmic. I followed it to the mantel. A small wooden clock sat there, hands frozen at 11:47. "Creepy," Emma murmured. "It's like time stopped here." The air suddenly shifted, heavier. The floorboards behind us creaked again. We both turned at once, but there was nothing. Just the open hallway. Then faintly from upstairs we heard Matt call out, "Hey, guys, you need to see this." His voice was muffled but urgent. We hurried to the staircase, calling back, "What is it?" There was no reply. We climbed the stairs, the wood bending beneath each step. The second floor was pitch black except for the faint blue glow of moonlight leaking through a broken window. "Matt?" I whispered. The silence that answered felt alive. Then, a door down the hall creaked open on its own. We froze. Something moved just beyond the doorway. A shape, tall, human, but wrong. The head was too low. The shoulders hunched forward unnaturally. It took one slow step into the light. For a split second, I thought it was Matt. But then I saw its face. There wasn't one, just smooth. Pale skin stretched tight over where features should have been. Emma gasped. The thing tilted its head toward us as if curious. Then in a jerky, unnatural motion it took another step, and the floor between us groaned. That sound broke the spell. I grabbed Emma's hand and ran back down the stairs, yelling for Jordan. He met us halfway in the hallway, confused. "What's going on?" "Something's up there," I shouted. "Where's Matt?" He went upstairs. Before Jordan could finish, a heavy thud shook the ceiling. Then another. Then silence. Emma started crying quietly, shaking her head. I turned my flashlight back toward the staircase. For a second, I thought I saw a shadow move across the top step, slow and deliberate. We backed toward the kitchen, ready to bolt. That's when I noticed the lantern hanging outside the house through the window. It was lit. The flame burned steady, casting long shadows across the yard. I'd swear on my life it hadn't been lit when we came in. "Let's go," I whispered. We climbed out the same window we'd entered and sprinted toward the road. The night was dead quiet again. No wind, no insects, nothing. When we finally stopped running, gasping for breath, we realized Matt wasn't with us. Jordan wanted to go back. I said no. So did Emma. We called his name into the woods for what felt like an hour, but he never answered. Finally, around 3 a.m., we drove to the nearest gas station and called the police. They searched the house that night but found no trace of him. His car, camera, and backpack were still outside, untouched. The only thing they mentioned was strange. When the officers entered the house, the clock above the mantel, the one frozen at 11:47, had started ticking again. It's been 7 years since that night. They never found Matt. His case went cold. Sometimes late at night I rewatch the few minutes of footage that didn't glitch. In one frame, and just before the camera cut out, you can see him at the top of the stairs, flashlight shaking, mouth open in shock. Behind him, in the shadows, something tall is stepping forward. And every Halloween since, someone posts a new photo of the Holloway place online. The lantern outside is always burning. The same steady flame, never flickering, never fading. I drove past it last year out of morbid curiosity. The house is still standing, silent, sagging under the weight of years. But what froze me wasn't the house. It was the window on the second floor. Someone was standing there. Tall. Still. Watching. And when my headlights swept past, for just a second I saw the faint outline of a face pressed against the glass. Or rather, where a face should have been. Voices through the walls. It's been almost 5 years since it happened. But even now, I still can't sleep in complete silence. If I do, I swear I start hearing it again. Those faint whispers through the walls that night. Back in October 2020, I was 24, living alone for the first time. I had just moved into an old duplex outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom unit, old wooden floors, faded wallpaper that probably hadn't been changed since the 70s. The landlord, Mr. Keller, was this quiet older guy who lived 2 streets over. He warned me that the place was old and creaky, but I didn't mind. The rent was cheap and I was desperate for space. I moved in 2 weeks before Halloween. Everything seemed fine at first, except for the strange noises. Old houses always have sounds, but this was different. Around 2 a.m. every night, I'd hear faint tapping inside the walls. It wasn't mice, I knew what that sounded like. This was rhythmic, like someone lightly dragging their nails along the inside of the drywall. I remember one night sitting on the couch watching TV when I first heard it clearly. A slow, steady scratching coming from behind the living room wall, just to the right of the old fireplace. I muted the TV and the sound stopped. When I turned the volume back up, it started again. That pattern continued for days. By the time Halloween week rolled around, the noises had grown bolder. I'd sometimes hear faint voices through the wall, like 2 people whispering on the other side. Always around the same time, between 2 and 3 a.m. I told myself it was the neighbors, but that didn't make sense. The other half of the duplex had been empty for months. Mr. Keller said he couldn't find anyone willing to stay long. The night of October 30th was the worst. It was cold, the kind of dry cold that makes the floorboards groan under your feet. I was in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard it again, a soft whispering sound coming from behind the headboard. It was faint at first, like the rustle of fabric, but then I started making out words. It sounded like a man's voice, low, rasping, muttering something I couldn't quite understand. I leaned closer, holding my breath. "Help me." That's what it said. I froze. For a second I thought I imagined it, and until it came again a little louder. "Help me." My stomach dropped. The voice sounded desperate, broken, like someone trying to speak through clenched teeth. I jumped out of bed and turned on the light. The sound stopped instantly. I spent the rest of the night on the couch with every light in the house on. The next morning I called Mr. Keller. He sounded annoyed but agreed to come check. When he showed up, I pointed at the wall behind my bed. "There's something in there," I told him. "It's not animals, it's someone talking." He frowned. "Talking? You sure you haven't been watching too many of those ghost shows?" I forced a laugh, but I wasn't joking. He tapped on the wall a few times and said, "It's just air ducts, son. This place breathes. You'll get used to it," but I didn't. That night, Halloween night, the whispering returned, louder, clearer. This time, there were 2 voices, one male, one female. I couldn't make out every word, but it sounded like an argument. "You promised." "Not now." "Not again, 'tis and I, they'll hear us." And I sat there frozen in bed, every nerve on fire. The voices seemed to move along the wall, traveling from one side of the room to the other. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The audio picked up faint static and what sounded like distant murmuring, but nothing clear. At around 2:45 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. A knock. 3 sharp knocks from inside the wall. I jumped up, heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Who's there?" I shouted. The knocks came again, slower this time. Then silence. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of the room with a flashlight until the first light of dawn crept through the blinds. The whispers didn't come back that morning, but something else did. When I went into the kitchen, I noticed the cupboard door under the sink was open. I never left it open. Inside, a panel of the back wall had shifted slightly, revealing a small gap. I crouched down and peered inside with my flashlight. There was space, a hollow cavity between my unit and the empty one next door. It looked like some kind of crawl space or sealed corridor, and right there, etched faintly into the wooden panel, were words. "We're still here." I backed away so fast I hit my head on the counter. I called Mr. Keller immediately, demanding to know what was between the walls. He went quiet for a long time. Then he sighed. "You found the crawl space, huh?" Apparently, years ago, in the late 80s, the duplex had been one large home. A couple lived there with their teenage son. One night, the house caught fire. The parents died, but the boy survived. He'd apparently gone missing afterward. The city split the house in two when it was rebuilt, and no one had lived comfortably there since. Tenants complained of voices and knocking, but Keller said he never found anything unusual. That night, I decided I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed what I could and planned to leave the next morning. But the house had other plans. At around 2:20 a.m., as I was sitting on the floor of the living room surrounded by boxes, the whispering started again, louder than ever. It sounded like it was coming from inside the room now, not just the wall. The air turned icy cold. I could see my breath fog in the flashlight beam. The voices were frantic this time, overlapping, whispering so fast I couldn't understand. Then I heard the words again, clear, right by my ear. "Help us." I spun around. No one was there, and then the scratching began. Violent, scraping from inside the walls like nails clawing to get out. The entire wall to my right began to tremble. Dust fell from the ceiling. "Stop," I shouted. "Please stop." The noises ceased instantly. I stood there shaking, flashlight trembling in my hand when something caught my eye. The section of wallpaper beside the fireplace was bulging outward slightly, like someone was pressing from behind. Then slowly a handprint appeared beneath the surface. I stumbled backward, tripped over a box, and fell hard. When I looked again, the handprint was gone. I ran out of the house barefoot, got in my car, and didn't stop driving until I reached my friend Eric's place across town. The next day, I went back only to grab my remaining things. Mr. Keller was there, looking uneasy. I told him everything that happened. He just shook his head. "You're not the first," he muttered. "Maybe not the last either." He didn't ask for the keys. He just said, "I'll board it up again." I moved out that day. A few weeks later, I got curious. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. I went by the old duplex one last time. The windows were covered with plywood, the grass overgrown. But as I stood by the curb, I swear I heard it again, faintly through the boarded-up siding. A voice. "Help us." I walked closer and placed my hand against the cold wood. The whisper came again, almost right against my palm. "Still here." I stepped back shaking and ran to my car. I haven't been back since, and I don't plan to. But sometimes when the house I live in now gets too quiet at night, I start hearing faint murmurs, like something just beneath the surface of the walls. I tell myself it's the pipes, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down I know the truth. Some voices never stop calling once you've heard them. The house that breathed. I've always loved exploring abandoned places. Not for thrill-seeking or ghost hunting, but for photography. I like the way decay tells a story. Peeling paint, collapsed staircases, nature taking over what humans left behind. It used to feel peaceful to me, but after what happened on Halloween night 3 years ago, I can't step foot in an abandoned building again. Not after the house that breathed. It was October 31st, 2021. My friend Nate and I were driving through a rural part of Western Virginia, trying to find old architecture to shoot for a college photography project. We'd already visited a few barns and an abandoned motel when we came across the house. It was around 4:30 p.m. when we saw it. A massive Victorian sitting alone on a hill, surrounded by dead trees and knee-high weeds. The white paint had long since flaked off. The windows were black and empty, and the porch leaned forward as if the whole structure were sighing. A faded "no trespassing" sign swung in the wind, tapping rhythmically against the post. Nate pulled over and grinned. "Tell me that doesn't look perfect." I hesitated. The place had a strange pull to it, not just creepy but heavy. Like the air around it was thicker somehow. Still, the lighting was perfect, the kind of dusky orange that made everything glow. So we grabbed our cameras and started walking up the dirt path. The closer we got, the colder it felt. No wind, no birds, just still air that seemed to hum faintly. When we reached the porch, the wood creaked under our weight, echoing through the silence. Nate pushed the front door open. It swung easily, revealing a long, shadowy hallway. The air inside was damp and oddly warm, not like normal heat, but breath warm, as if the walls themselves exhaled. I remember stepping inside and immediately smelling something faintly metallic, like old pennies. We moved carefully through the rooms, my camera clicking, the flash illuminating moldy wallpaper, broken furniture, and a grand staircase that had collapsed halfway up. The place looked like it had been empty for decades, but it didn't feel empty. At one point, Nate called out, "Yo, check this out." He'd found a small study near the back of the house. Inside, there was an old desk covered in dust, a cracked globe, and dozens of photographs scattered across the floor. They were all black and white. Families, children, portraits. But every single face had been scratched out with something sharp. That's when I noticed something strange. Every time I exhaled, the air seemed to move back at me, like the room was breathing in sync with us. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to drafts. But Nate noticed it too. "Dude," he whispered, "the air feels alive in here." I laughed nervously. Yeah, it's probably just pressure changes. But the feeling didn't go away. In fact, the deeper we went into the house, the stronger it got. It was like standing next to something enormous, invisible, something sleeping but faintly stirring. By the time the sun went down, we decided to wrap up. We were heading back toward the front door when Nate pointed at a narrow doorway under the stairs. "What's that?" I shined my flashlight on a small wooden door barely 4 feet high. A basement entrance, maybe. The knob was rusted, but when I turned it, it gave easily. A stale gust of warm air hit my face, carrying that metallic smell again, stronger this time. The steps led down into near darkness. I didn't want to go, but Nate insisted. "Just one shot from down there." "Come on," we descended slowly. The stairs groaned like they were alive. The basement was low-ceilinged and lined with stone walls slick with moisture. Old jars, broken furniture, and piles of yellowed newspapers were scattered around. Then I noticed something odd. Faint impressions on the dirt floor, like shallow indentations forming a circle. In the center sat what looked like a covered well. Nate approached it and pulled the tarp off. Beneath it wasn't water, but a deep, dark hole. So black it absorbed the flashlight beam. The air pouring from it was hot and steady, like the breath of something massive beneath us. "Holy hell," Nate murmured. "It's breathing." I told him to back away, but he leaned closer, lowering the camera for a shot. Suddenly, the exhalation stopped. We both froze. The silence was so heavy it felt physical. Then a long, slow inhale. The air around us shifted inward, tugging at our clothes and hair as if the whole house were drawing breath. "Go," I shouted. Nate stumbled backward. The house let out a groaning sound that shook the beams above us. Dust rained down. The floor beneath our feet rippled slightly, and I swear for a second it pulsed like skin. We sprinted up the stairs, slamming into the walls as the sound followed, a deep, rhythmic whooshing, in and out like lungs expanding and contracting. The front door had shut itself, but Nate yanked it open, and we burst outside into the cold night air. The moment we stepped off the porch, the sound stopped. We stood there gasping, our own breath clouding in the moonlight. The house was utterly still again. The windows looked dark and hollow, but I could swear, just for a moment, something shifted behind one of them. We didn't speak all the way back to the car. Once inside, Nate started the engine and just stared at the house. "You saw that, right?" It was alive. I didn't answer. I couldn't. We drove back to town in silence. When I got home that night, I transferred my photos to my laptop. Most looked normal. Dusty rooms, collapsed stairs, debris. But the last one Nate took down in the basement stopped me cold. It showed the covered well, but there were hands gripping the edge of it. Dozens of them, pale and thin, pressing outward like something was trying to crawl up. I called Nate immediately. He picked up after a few rings, sounding strange, breathless. Yeah? Did you look at the last picture? I asked. He didn't respond right away. Then he whispered, "It's still breathing." "What?" "I can hear it. In my apartment. It's here." I thought he was joking, but his voice was shaking. He hung up. I tried calling back, but he didn't answer. The next day, I went by his place. Police cars were parked outside. His neighbor said they'd found him early that morning, collapsed in the hallway, no sign of struggle, no cause of death. The coroner said his lungs had imploded, like the air had been sucked out of him. I didn't tell anyone what we'd done. 2 months later, I went back through my photos again, searching for answers. In one image, the one I took near the living room door, the wallpaper seemed to bulge slightly, like something pressing from behind it. But the strangest part wasn't the wall. It was what I saw in the reflection of the cracked mirror on the floor. Behind me, the entire house appeared to be breathing. The walls expanding, the ceiling flexing, and in two dark shapes standing right where Nate and I had been, watching. I deleted the photos that night. But even now, sometimes when I'm in bed, I'll wake up gasping, like the air has been pulled from the room. And in those moments, I swear I can feel it again. A faint pulse beneath the floorboards, as though the house, wherever it is now, still remembers me. Still waiting to inhale again. The whispering attic. I was 16 the first time I heard the whispers coming from the attic. It was Halloween night 2013. I remember because my parents had gone to a costume party, leaving me home alone for the first time in our new house. An old, creaky 2-story place my dad had bought cheap on the outskirts of town. He loved calling it a fixer-upper, but to me it just felt wrong. From the moment we moved in, there was something strange about that house. The walls seemed to hold sound in weird ways. I could be in the kitchen and swear I heard footsteps upstairs, only to find no one there. And then there was the attic, a narrow triangular space above my bedroom, accessible only by a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. My mom refused to store anything up there. She said it smelled bad and like mildew and iron. Dad said it was probably old insulation. But even he didn't go up there often. That Halloween night it was raining, steady, cold rain tapping against the windows. The house made more noise than usual when it rained. Every gust of wind made the wood groan, and I could hear water trickling inside the gutters. I was lying on the couch around 10:45 p.m., eating candy and watching some low-budget horror movie, when I heard it for the first time, a voice faint, but clear, coming from above. At first I thought it was the TV, so I muted it. The voice kept going, a soft murmur that sounded like someone whispering right above the ceiling. I sat up slowly, every hair on my neck standing. It wasn't a full sentence, more like fragmented words, muffled but distinct. "Can you hear me?" My stomach dropped. I turned the volume back up, trying to ignore it. But a few seconds later, I heard a faint scraping, like something being dragged across the attic floor. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or squirrel, but my heart wouldn't slow down. The whisper came again, closer this time. Up here, that was enough. I grabbed my phone, called my dad. No answer. Tried my mom, voicemail. I even texted my friend Dylan, but he didn't reply either. I sat there staring at the ceiling, listening. Silence. Then, 3 slow thuds directly above the couch. I jumped to my feet, eyes locked on the ceiling. Whatever it was moving. 1 step, 2, 3, crossing toward the hallway. The old boards creaked under its weight. Something was up there. I turned off the TV to listen better. For a few seconds, nothing. Then I heard the distinct sound of the attic ladder creaking, just slightly, like pressure was being put on it from above. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and slowly stepped into the hallway. The ceiling hatch loomed above, the pull string swaying gently as if touched by a breeze, except there was no wind inside. My voice came out shaky. "Dad?" Silence, then a whispering again directly above. "Don't look." I froze. The sound was clearer now, almost right against the ceiling panel. It didn't sound like one voice anymore. There were 2, a man and a woman whispering back and forth. Too low to make out the words, but their tone, urgent, angry, like arguing under their breath. I took 1 step backward, and the whispering stopped. The silence pressed down like a weight. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Suddenly, the light bulb in the hallway flickered. Once, twice. Then it went out completely, plunging me into darkness. I bolted back to the living room, flicked on every lamp I could find, and sat on the couch gripping the flashlight like a weapon. I stayed like that for maybe an hour, and nothing else happened. The rain stopped. The whispers were gone. By the time my parents came home around 1:30 a.m., I felt almost silly telling them. But when I did, my mom went pale. Dad tried to laugh it off. "Old houses settle," he said. "Sound travels weird up there." But Mom didn't say anything. She just stared at the ceiling for a long time. The next morning, I woke up to find Dad pulling down the attic ladder. "Just to check it out," he said, climbing up with a flashlight. I followed him halfway, the smell hitting me immediately. Musty, metallic, and cold. He shined the light around. The attic was empty except for old boxes and insulation. Nothing looked out of place. But as he started to climb back down, he stopped. "What's that?" I asked. He pointed his flashlight at the far wall. There were markings, faint, carved into the wood. 4 words scratched over and over again like someone desperate to leave a message. "They live in the walls." Dad went silent for a long time. Then he muttered something about kids messing around and climbed down, closing the hatch tight. He told me not to mention it to Mom, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few nights, things got worse. I'd wake up around 3 a.m. to faint whispering again, not just from the attic now, but the walls of my room. It sounded like someone pacing above, muttering, stopping, then whispering right above my head. One night I recorded it on my phone. The playback was faint static mixed with what sounded like breathing. Deep, uneven breathing, like someone struggling to stay quiet. That's when I noticed something else. Every time the whispers came, the air in the room grew colder. So cold that frost formed on the corners of my window, even though it wasn't winter yet. A few days later, Mom finally admitted she'd been hearing it too. "I thought it was just my imagination," she said, eyes tired. "I hear a woman crying every night around 3. Dad refused to believe us. "Pipes, just pipes." That night, he decided to prove it. Around midnight, he climbed up into the attic again, flashlight and all, telling us to stay downstairs. 10 minutes passed. Then 15, finally I called up. "Dad, you okay?" No answer. A minute later, there was a loud thud. Mom screamed. I grabbed the ladder and we both climbed up part way. The attic was dark. Dad's flashlight lay rolling on the floor, its beam shaking across the rafters. But no sign of him. Then from the far corner, we heard his voice. Low. Hoarse. "Don't come up here." Mom froze. "What?" He said it again, louder. "Don't come up here." Then silence. We climbed the rest of the way, but he wasn't there. Just a single footprint in the dust leading toward the back wall, and stopping abruptly as if he'd stepped into thin air. Police searched for weeks. They tore open the walls, the floorboards, everything. No trace. The only thing they found was a small space behind one of the attic walls, about 3 feet wide, running the length of the house. Inside, they found a few old objects, a broken mirror, a child's shoe, and an old photograph of 2 people standing in what looked like our living room. The faces were scratched out. We moved out a month later. Mom never recovered from what happened, and I still can't stand the sound of whispering. Even a crowd murmuring in public gives me chills. A few years after we left, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the house's history online. Turns out a couple who lived there in the 1940s vanished without a trace. They'd complained to neighbors about voices in the attic before disappearing one Halloween night. No one ever found them. Sometimes I wonder if that's who we heard, trapped between the walls, trying to warn us. Other times, when I'm alone in my apartment and the building settles late at night, I think I still hear them faintly, just above the ceiling, whispering, "Don't look." The door that wouldn't stay closed. I've never believed in ghosts, not until the night that door kept opening. It happened 2 Halloweens ago, in a rental house my girlfriend and I had just moved into. It was a small 2-bedroom place on the edge of town, built in the late 1940s, the kind of home that looks charming in the daylight but turns unsettling once the sun goes down. The landlord, an older woman named Mrs. Hensley, had warned us that the back bedroom's door sometimes swung open on its own. She blamed the uneven floors, said it happened every winter when the wood warped from humidity. I didn't think much of it at the time. But that Halloween night, the door did more than swing open. We'd stayed home instead of going to a party, planning to watch horror movies and hand out candy. Around 9 p.m., trick-or-treaters stopped coming and the street outside grew quiet, the kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat if you listen long enough. At 9:47, I remember the time because I had just glanced at the microwave clock. We both heard a soft creak from the hallway. Probably the cat, I said automatically, except our cat Milo was sitting right beside me on the couch, ears perked, staring down the dark hallway. The creak came again, longer this time, followed by the distinct sound of wood tapping gently against the wall. "The door," Claire said. She grabbed my arm, and I sighed, forcing a laugh. "It's just the old hinges." Still, I got up, flicked on the hall light, and walked to the back bedroom. The door was open, only slightly, maybe 2 inches, just enough to cast a thin sliver of darkness across the hall floor. I pushed it closed, heard the latch click, then gave it a little tug to be sure it stayed shut. Solid. I turned back toward the living room. But before I could take 2 steps, the sound came again in a slow, deliberate creak. The door was opening, very slowly, as though someone on the other side was easing it open an inch at a time. Claire whispered, "Did you see that?" My heart started hammering. I walked back to it, pushed it closed again, this time harder. Then I twisted the small lock on the handle. "There, happy?" I tried to sound casual, but my voice cracked. We both stood there for a few seconds, waiting. Silence. I turned to walk away. Click. The lock turned. Not loudly, but audibly, the faint metallic snick of the handle rotating. I froze. Slowly the door eased open once more. Milo hissed, back-arching, fur standing straight up. Claire whispered, "Someone's in there." That was my first thought, too. And suddenly the old house explanations didn't feel good enough. I grabbed the heavy flashlight we kept by the door and inched closer. My hand was trembling so bad that the beam shook across the walls. The bedroom beyond was empty. I swept the light across every corner. The old dresser, the closet under the bed. Nothing. Just the faint smell of dust and something metallic. "Like rust or dried blood, see?" I said, but my voice didn't sound like mine. Nothing. We decided to leave the door open, thinking maybe it was just air pressure or warped wood. But the whole night I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching from that dark doorway. Around 11:30 p.m., the house grew colder. Not just cooler, cold. I checked the thermostat, still set to 72, but the air had a damp chill to it, like when you walk into a basement after rain. That's when the noises started again. First, faint tapping from inside the walls. Then whispering, so low I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a woman's voice murmuring right behind the door. Claire sat up on the couch, clutching her blanket. "Do you hear that?" Before I could answer, the door slammed shut. The sound was so loud it rattled a picture frame off the wall. Milo bolted under the couch. We just stared at the hallway. I could see the door vibrating slightly, as though something on the other side was pressing against it. I took a deep breath and started walking toward it, every instinct in me screaming not to. The air got colder with each step. I could see my breath fog in the light. My fingers were numb when I reached for the handle. "Don't," Claire whispered behind me. But I did. The moment I touched the doorknob, a deep, low moan came from the other side. Not human, not mechanical, something wrong. The metal was ice cold under my hand. I yanked it open. The room was empty again, except this time the window was open. Rain blew in through the torn screen, puddling on the hardwood floor. Claire came up beside me, voice shaking. "You closed that earlier." "I saw you." "I did," I said. I closed the window, locked it, then shut the door one more time. This time I wedged a heavy chair under the knob. We both tried to laugh it off and decided to go to bed, leaving the hallway light on. At 2:46 a.m., I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. The slow scrape of wood against wood. I sat up and listened. Then I heard the chair tip over, a soft thud, followed by the familiar creak of the door opening. I grabbed my phone, switched on the flashlight, and stepped into the hallway. The air was freezing. My breath came out in quick white clouds. The door stood wide open. But what stopped me cold wasn't that. It was the faint figure standing just inside the room. It was tall, almost touching the ceiling, Thin like a shadow stretched too far. No face, no details, just a dark shape that shouldn't have been there. I stood there for maybe 3 seconds, frozen, unable to breathe. Then it moved, not toward me, through the wall. The shadow slid sideways and vanished into the plaster as though melting into it. Claire screamed behind me. We both ran out the front door barefoot into the cold night rain. We sat in the car till sunrise, shaking. The next day we called Mrs. Hensley and told her everything. She didn't sound surprised. "Oh," she said quietly. "The back room again." "What do you mean again?" I asked. She hesitated. Then she told us that 20 years ago a woman had rented the house alone. She was found dead in that room. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. The door was locked from the inside, but neighbors said they'd heard it slamming over and over the night before. Police said her heart just stopped, Mrs. Hensley whispered. But I always thought she wasn't alone in there. We moved out 2 weeks later. I never went back for the deposit. Sometimes, though, late at night, I'll dream about that door, see it slowly opening in the dark, just enough for a thin line of shadow to spill through. And when I wake up, I swear I can still hear the creak of the hinges right behind me. The basement that breathed. I grew up in a small town in northern Pennsylvania, in one of those neighborhoods where every house has a basement. Ours was old, built in 1926 with stone walls, a dirt floor, and a single naked bulb hanging from the ceiling. My parents mostly used it for storage, and I wasn't allowed down there much as a kid. They said it was unsafe. Mold, loose wiring, the usual stuff. But I always felt it was something else they weren't telling me. The basement had a smell to it. Not just musty, but heavy like wet earth and rusted metal. And the air? It always felt alive, like it moved on its own, even when the vents were shut. When I turned 18, my parents left town for a week in late October, and I stayed behind to look after the house. It was right before Halloween, a chilly Friday night, and I'd invited my friend Tyler over to hang out. We planned to watch horror movies and maybe sneak a few beers. Around 11 p.m., the wind outside picked up. You could hear it whistling through the trees, making the old house groan. The power flickered once, then held steady. Tyler was in the kitchen grabbing snacks when he called out, "Hey man, your furnace just kicked on." I frowned. "It shouldn't. Thermostat's off." We both went quiet for a second, listening. A low hum was coming from beneath the floor, rhythmic and uneven, like breathing. "Probably the pipes," I said, though my stomach twisted as I said it. Then came the smell. It drifted up from the basement door. That same metallic, earthy stench I remembered from childhood, only stronger. Tyler wrinkled his nose. "Dude, that's not pipes. That's something dead." We stood by the basement door. It was an old wooden thing with peeling white paint, a keyhole too large for its lock, and faint scratches along the bottom. I'd always wondered about those scratches, like something had clawed from inside. The breathing sound continued, slow, steady, in and out. You could almost feel the vibration in the floorboards. Tyler grinned nervously. "You're gonna tell me you don't hear that?" I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer. "Let's check it out." The door creaked as I opened it. A wave of cold, damp air hit us immediately, smelling of dirt and something sour. The light switch at the top of the stairs didn't work, so I pointed the flashlight downward. The beam barely reached the bottom steps. "Man, screw this," Tyler muttered, but he followed me down anyway. Each step groaned under our feet. When we reached the bottom, the breathing stopped. The silence was deafening. The basement looked the same as always. Shelves of paint cans, boxes, old furniture. But the air felt thick, like walking into a cave. I swept the flashlight across the far wall and froze. The stone was wet, not with water, but with something darker. Thick streaks ran down from a small crack near the center, almost pulsing as the beam hit it. Tyler whispered, "What the hell is that?" Before I could answer, the floor shifted under us. A faint vibration like something massive had exhaled beneath the ground. The flashlight flickered, then went out completely. Tyler cursed. "Dude, turn it back on." I smacked it against my hand. Nothing. Then, in the pitch dark, we heard it again. That low. Heavy inhale. It was right beneath our feet. The floor bulged slightly, just enough for us to feel the air move upward, warm and damp. Tyler bolted up the stairs. I followed, nearly tripping in the dark. When we burst through the door, he slammed it shut behind us. For a moment, we stood there gasping. Then came the sound, faint but unmistakable, of something dragging itself across the dirt below. I locked the door. Neither of us said much after that. Tyler left soon after, muttering that he'd had enough of my creepy house. I stayed up most of the night, staring at the door, half expecting it to open, but it didn't. The next morning, sunlight made everything feel stupidly normal. I convinced myself it was just air pressure, maybe a pipe burst underground. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the basement door again just to peek. The air that rose up was warm, too warm for a fall morning. When I shone a new flashlight down the steps, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. The dirt floor wasn't flat anymore. There was a mound in the center, like the earth had shifted from beneath. And at the top of the mound was a small hole, maybe the size of a fist. I could see faint steam rising from it like breath. I didn't go down. I shut the door and nailed it closed. That night, around 3:00 a.m., I woke up to a sound that made my blood freeze. The basement door was breathing. I know how that sounds. Impossible. But that's what it was. Each inhale pulled the door inward with a faint creak, and each exhale made it push out slightly. The wood flexed, the lock rattled, and with every breath came a whisper, low and wet, like words being formed underwater. I pressed my ear to the door and could barely make them out. Hungry! I jumped back so fast I nearly tripped. The next morning I went down to the hardware store and bought heavy boards and screws. I sealed the door completely. When my parents came home, I told them there was a mold problem and the floor was collapsing. They didn't question it. For months I pretended everything was fine. But every now and then I'd feel vibrations through the floor at night, subtle, rhythmic. And sometimes the smell would come back drifting through the vents, wet earth and metal. We sold the house the next summer. A few years later, curiosity got the best of me again. I looked up the property online. The listing photos showed the basement, clean, freshly cemented. But in one of the pictures, if you zoomed in near the back wall, you could see it. A dark spot, round, like a hole that had been filled in too hastily. And the description said, "Brand new foundation poured due to structural shifting beneath the floor." They made it sound normal, routine. But sometimes when I lie awake at night, I swear I can still feel that breathing beneath me, slow and patient, like the earth itself waiting for me to come back. The house that followed me home. It's been almost 5 years since that night, and I still check my rearview mirror whenever I drive home after dark. I keep expecting to see it again, that old house, standing where it shouldn't. The first time I saw it was on Halloween night 2020. I was 24, working part-time as a photographer for a small-town newspaper in Maine. My editor, Vince, sent me to cover a local ghost walk event at the old Harrington property, a crumbling Victorian house at the end of a dirt road, about 5 miles outside town. The place had been abandoned since the 1970s, after a family of 5 mysteriously vanished. The police never found anything, just their cars in the driveway and the front door wide open. Over the years, the house became one of those spots teenagers dared each other to visit on Halloween. I didn't believe in any of it, of course. Ghost stories made good photos and better headlines. When I arrived around 8:15 p.m., the sky was pitch black. The air smelled like rain and wet leaves. I parked near the tree line, grabbed my camera, and walked toward the house with a few other people from the event. Even from a distance, the place looked wrong. Its angles slightly off, as if it was leaning toward you. The shutters banged softly in the wind. The porch sagged. Every window was dark except one, way up on the 3rd floor where I thought I saw a faint orange flicker. Probably a flashlight, someone muttered behind me. Inside, the air was thick with rot. The floor groaned with every step. I took photos. Long hallway shots, wide angles of the staircase, close-ups of peeling wallpaper. The house seemed to breathe. Every gust of wind through the gaps in the boards made the whole frame shift. Around 9:00 p.m., the group moved upstairs. I lingered on the ground floor to get a few shots of the front parlor. There was an old piano there, keys yellowed with age. I remember crouching to photograph it. And that's when I heard it. A faint click. like a door latch being lifted. I looked toward the hallway. The front door, which I knew had been open when I arrived, was slowly swinging shut. "Hey," I called out, thinking someone was messing with me. The door closed completely, sealing out what little moonlight there was. The room fell into dim orange light from my camera's display. Then I heard it. Footsteps, coming down the stairs, slow, heavy. One step at a time. I froze. "Is someone there?" No answer, just another step. Then another. The weight of each one made the floorboards creak in a steady rhythm. I turned my flashlight toward the staircase. The beam caught something at the top landing, a shadow too tall and too still to be a person. My voice shook. "Hello?" The shape moved. It wasn't walking, it slid, soundless, down the steps. The light flickered, and then it was gone. I ran for the door, yanked it open, and didn't stop until I was in my car. My hands shook so hard I dropped my keys twice before I could start the engine. When I looked back, the house stood perfectly still, dark against the tree line. I drove straight home, trying to convince myself it had just been a trick of light. Maybe another person. Maybe a shadow. But the next morning, something strange happened. When I stepped outside for work, there it was, a faint outline of a house reflected in the dew on my windshield. It wasn't my house's reflection. It had 3 floors, pointed gables, and that same lopsided shape. I wiped it away, unsettled. That night, around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a sound that didn't belong, the low groan of wood shifting like someone walking on old floorboards. The noise was coming from downstairs. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the living room. The air felt thick, humid, like before a thunderstorm. Then I noticed something that made my heart drop. The smell. That same smell from the Harrington house. Damp, decayed wood and something faintly sweet, like old flowers rotting in water. The light flickered. My reflection in the window wavered, and for a split second I saw it. Not my own house, but the Harrington property. Standing behind me in the glass, I turned around. Nothing. The next morning, I found muddy prints leading from my front door to the kitchen. Long, narrow, bare footprints. I checked the locks. Called the police, even had a friend stay over the next night. Nothing happened while he was there. But when I was alone again, the sounds came back. Creaking floors, whispering wind, faint tapping at the walls. By Halloween of the next year, I'd moved apartments twice. Each time it followed, it was never the same, but always similar. Faint reflections of a tall Victorian house appearing where they shouldn't. In my TV screen when it was off, in my side mirrors while driving, even in puddles after rain. Once, driving home late from work, I saw headlights flicker as my car passed a bend in the road. I glanced left and there it was, the house, standing in a field that should have been empty, its windows glowing faintly orange. I slammed on the brakes and backed up. Gone. Only tall grass waving in the headlights. I stopped taking photos after that. Quit the paper. Started avoiding cameras entirely. It sounds crazy, but I swear it's like the house doesn't want to be forgotten. Like it imprints itself on anything that captures it. Last winter, I finally threw away the SD card from that night. But a few weeks later, I got an email from my old editor. "Hey," he wrote, "we were clearing old archives and found some of your photos from the Harrington shoot. Thought you might want them." Attached was a single image, a grainy photo of the front parlor, except this one was different. In the picture, the door wasn't open like I remembered. It was closed, and in the reflection of the piano's lacquered surface, I could just make out a tall, dark figure standing behind the camera, behind me. I deleted the email immediately. But lately, I've started to smell it again, that damp, earthy rot, and last night, as I was driving home around 3 a.m., I caught a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror. Faint, but unmistakable. The outline of a house, 3 floors. Tilted roof. One window on the top floor glowing dim orange. I pulled over, heart pounding, and looked back down the empty road. Nothing. But when I got home, the reflection was waiting for me, faintly visible in the glass of my front door. The same house. And for the first time, I swear I heard it. A low creaking sound, coming from the walls inside my own home, like wood shifting, like footsteps, like it was settling in,